Check
Yep.
one. Check one.
How about this one? Is it coming through?
Yep.
Okay.
Sounds good. Welcome to the podcast American Filmmaker. On this episode, we are going to look at a new writing movement and publishing movement that is emerging in the United States. It's as if the DIY craft and arts movement is now coming to writing and literature and novels, short stories, poems. The new generation that's coming up is rediscovering writing and rediscovering the phenomena of zines from the 90s. And so we're going to talk to an independent publisher who works out of the Trident Press.
Hey, I'm Nathaniel Kennon Perkins. Nate Perkins.
Me and Nathan work at this coffee shop, and we both try to do our kind of creative work there. And so one day we just started talking, and then from there we just kind of, in my mind, I just really respect creative people who are constantly doing creative things. And as a filmmaker, trying to write and then trying to edit and then trying to make a movie, I've always been fascinated with just the process of writing and creativity. And so we met at the coffee shop, and then from there we just started talking about creative projects. Well, what is the Trident Cafe? Where is it? And what is the Trident Press?
Okay. So Trident Booksellers and Cafe is a coffee shop and bookstore on the west end of Pearl Street in Boulder, Colorado. It's been around since 1979. It started as a Buddhist bookstore. So I am relatively new to it in the timeline of things, right? But I was living in New Mexico after living in Boulder for a while. I left Boulder, moved to New Mexico to start a co-op farmstead in the mountains.
This sounds amazing.
Well, it failed terribly. Failed terribly. The idea was great, right? This little house up in the mountains with lots of garden space and chickens, and it backed right up to national forest, and I was living with all these people that I cared about. We all had the same vision. No, it didn't work out, though. It
Why didn't it
crashed
work?
and burned. Oh, just complications surrounding personal relationships, as happens when a bunch of people are living all isolated in the mountains together and, ultimately, boning each other. So I left in a hurry, and I was staying at my sister's house in Colorado Springs, and some of my friends saw that I was back in Colorado. My friend Stella, who used to work at Trident and now lives in Berlin, she emailed me. She's like, come up, say hi. So I did. I drove up to Boulder, went into Trident to hang out with her. And she said, somebody just quit. We're probably looking for somebody. And I didn't know where I was going in my life at that time. She's like, you should apply. So I put in an application. And then I had some other friends who had just gotten a house. And they're like, oh, we got an open room. So I ended up getting the job, getting into the house. I was like, cool, I guess I'm back in Boulder, which turned out to be the best move of my life. So that's how I ended up there. I started out just washing dishes like everybody does there. But because I have nerded out throughout the course of my life over books and storytelling and all of that stuff, I quickly started working on the bookstore side. And am now, after I've been there for 2 years, the longest I've ever had any one job, and I manage the bookstore side of the operation now. As
someone who writes a lot and does a lot of work in coffee shops, maybe it first started because in high school I needed coffee to do homework.
Right.
Trident is one of those bookstores that throughout the U.S. you have traveled, you have lived in different cities, New York, Chicago, and Trident is one of those bookstores that stands out in my mind because of there seems to be a social mission that underlies it. And even when I was talking to Peter, the manager, he was saying that, a lot of the ethos that they try to put out is, trying to leave the world better than you found it.
Right.
And just helping, this intention to give. And at first, being jaded, a little bit because it takes so much to basically make a film and create a film and, survive in the entertainment industry. I didn't necessarily believe it or understand it, but there was something that kept me coming back in the door to write And then as I would write, I would need like research. And so I would quickly go to the bookstore side and then just pick out a book and then start reading for research and then quickly get a couple ideas and then go back to writing and then finishing whatever I was working on. What is Trident? I've kind of noticed that there's a lot of regulars there.
Yeah.
And so because of that, when people think about Boulder, Colorado, I think even me, when I first moved here, there was points of it that I really loved, and then there were points of disenchantment.
Yeah.
So to me, Trident is this kind of arts outpost almost. It's like a mini Williamsburg or like wherever the art scene is happening in Toronto. I feel like it's got this epicenter for creativity amidst everything else that you hear about within Boulder, the startup community, the stockbrokers and the investment bankers, Google, the food scene.
Yeah.
So
I think you're right in what you say that like it is a creative outpost because it offers that space, right? Like films, great films have been written in there, books have been written in there. There's a poet, a local poet named Korkut Onaran, who wrote a book called The Trident Poems, right? Just because they were all poems that he'd written sitting in there, and they're beautiful. People have met there who have started bands. All sorts of great stuff happens there. And I think Peter, the general manager, knowing this and seeing this and being hip to all of this.
as well as Peter's part of that, I guess the other Boulder community we didn't talk about, which was the extreme athletes.
Yeah, totally.
And the tea aficionados.
Yeah, totally, right? He's like got his fingers in all those pies, and I was working there, and he came to me with this idea. He said, "Now I want to start a press out of here, something like City Lights out of, in San Francisco, I want to start a little press. Would you want to take on that project?" And of course, that is like a dream that I've had for a long time, being interested in independent publishing. And I had this unique opportunity to be able to do creative work and have the backing of this business and this community to do so, right? And also Peter's trust. And so I said yes, and started working on that. That was in middle of 2017, I guess, probably. And the first book we put out was Blood-Soaked Buddha, Hard Earth Pascal by Noah Cicero. This was Noah's first nonfiction book. He's written a bunch of novels, a bunch of short stories, a couple great poetry collections. And this book was just like a little weird thing that he was really passionate about, but couldn't find anybody to be into because it was too different from his other stuff.
And then even then with Noah, what kind of other stuff had he written in the past? And like, I know we talked a lot about Noah because I didn't really know about him. And then when you told me about him, I had to read the book. And then like literally everything that is now on the shelf, I will read as reference.
Noah is this sort of great weirdo writer who came up in the first wave of alt-lit, which, R.I.P. is now called many other things. But he was from Ohio, from Youngstown, Ohio.
Youngstown, shout out.
Yeah, and just wrote about the pains and horrors of being from Youngstown, among other things, and sort of garnered this cult following of people who liked this alt-lit or this independent literature. Slowly made his way west. He's traveled around the world, written all over the world, but slowly ended up in Las Vegas. And through the course of this, he says that he read like 16 feet of philosophy, meaning like if there was a shelf and all the philosophy books were lined up, it would be 16 feet long, and had this idea for this Buddhist book, this book about Buddhism. That's very like down to earth and accessible. He's not a monk, right? But he's like friends with monks. But he's like, I'm just going to write it the way I think about it and what I want with it. And it's very funny and very heartwarming, and
that's what struck me was the realism in it.
Yeah,
I mean, even like Frozen Pizza Time.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, where it's like, look, man, we live on frozen pizza time, but the reality is when you look at the atomic time and like the larger time scale, frozen pizza time doesn't even exist.
Totally.
It's like not even a blip on the radar.
Yeah.
It's a pre-blip.
Yeah, he's talking about universal truths through the lens of Totino's Party Pizza.
Yeah,
it's a fucking great book. But it was just like so weird that nobody else was interested. But I knew that he had been working on it for a while, and so I emailed him to see what was going on, told him that I had this thing going, I was going to start this press through Trident. And he sent it up, and we spent a long time editing it and working it through and laying it out and put it out. And it's a great book. And so that sort of paved the way for the other releases that we've put out, which are also from people who I've met over the years and whose work I really admire. And I was in this position to reach out and be like, yo, what do you have? Let's put it into the world, right? And so we put out It Gets Cold, which is a poetry book by Jasper Avery, who just won the Metatron Poetry Prize. We put out Major Diamonds, Knights and Knives by Katie Foster. Katie Foster is a great poem. She wrote a book called Animal Problems that I loved when it came out.
What was Animal Problems about? Because the title is really interesting.
Yeah. It's like all about relationships, but all of the characters are animals. And so it's just about the problems that these animals... I'm surely slaughtering this. Sorry, Katie.
It's like an updated Animal Farm, except everybody might be having sex.
Right.
Like, you'll probably
Yeah. And she's like dating this character named Soggy Dog. I love all the poems of Soggy Dog. And they're like poems about slugs having sex hanging from tree branches and stuff. It's a really great book. And so I hit her up to see if she wanted to do this. Let's see. Most recently, we put out a couple books that I'm just crazy about. We put out 60 Tattoos I Secretly Gave Myself at Work by Tanner Bollinger. He's a skateboarder from Tempe, Arizona, zine writer whose work I've followed for a long time. We became friends on the internet and eventually met up over beers and then stayed in touch. And it's just all about him working at a call center and being so bored that he just stick and poke tattoos himself all day long on his legs. And it's just all about every tattoo that he's given himself over this time and how some are totally meaningless and absurd and some have these deep stories behind them, and they sort of serve as this segue to him opening up about the joys and pains and excitement and heartache of life. And so it's really poignant and beautiful.
And that's one of the things that I think I noticed immediately was the honesty and the writing. It doesn't come from the traditional place where I guess, when we think of the arts, sometimes we think creativity comes from everywhere, but a lot of the creativity we see and is dominated is from the top down. And what I was fascinated by, and even with Noah's Blood-Soaked Buddha, as soon as I read it, I was moved to try to edit a trailer together, with no budget and no money. I just took archival stock footage because that's what, you can do with a book trailer.
Yeah.
But just to carry on kind of the ethos and some of the quotes that were written and then put those to kind of stock footage that evoked kind of the bigger message.
Yeah.
And it was the honesty. Do you think the stories come from different places? Than other kind of mainstream work. So that's why the stories feel different. They're very cinematic. Even some of the poetry work, and how it fused, even the poetry format stuff fuses into kind of the more novel formats. Mm-hmm. For me, they're like movies. Yeah. And so that's what kind of keeps me always opening the books. And then because they are really, really direct in that way. And then there's not only an authenticity, but there's a efficiency in the word use to deliver a message. Yeah. And even though that message might not be inherently there, the efficiency of the word use is something I really appreciate.
Yeah, I think that the most recent book that came out through Trident Press, The Silence is the Noise by Bart Schaneman, is I think that's a perfect example of that, right? Because Bart is a great writer, a great novelist. He works as a journalist. But recently, the writer and musician Adam Gennady said about Bart's work that it's one of those books that feels like watching a movie, but miles more significant, right? And I think that's totally right because it's plot driven, it's got good characters, there's this action, but Bart is speaking so clearly to his truth in a regional sense about the Great Plains and the American West and the identities of where we're from and the complicated relationships we have with the places we're from, that it rings really true. And I think that's, it's been said many times, right? That's the truth of art, is not in the artist's intention or in the viewer or the reader's intention, but somewhere in the middle, right? And to be able to create the space for the reader to connect to the writer and to have this own cloud of reality that exists between the two is the reader's job. And I think that these writers who are relying so heavily on their experience and their truth and aren't writing with someone looking over their shoulder, right? They're not trying to write for anyone. They're trying to write for themselves. That allows people to actually connect with them and to connect with their work. And, that's, I guess, as a publisher, that's what I'm looking for, right?
And then how does Fracking, because I know that Fracking's in that book, and I'm always fascinated and where stories come from.
Yeah, so The Silence is the Noise is about a young man who moves back to his small Nebraska hometown after years of being away, right? And he moves back because he wants to get in touch with the place, and he wants to hone his chops as a writer. So he picks up a job at the community newspaper there, starts working for them, and uses that as a way to examine the people in the place that have created him, right? And that he feels conflicted about. And while doing this, he uncovers this fracking wastewater injection operation on a rancher's land out there. And so he has to navigate like this greater morality in the context of his neighbors, right? Of his community, of people who he lives right next to but maybe doesn't agree with fully. But he's still their essence, who they are, is 100% linked to who he is. So it's a navigation of self as much as it's a navigation of community, and that's where the identity comes in. This identity of place that Bart is so good at creating. Yeah.
For people who don't live in today's American West, fracking, mining, the pursuit of energy resources, whether it's with windmills, solar power, all that is out here. Even nuclear waste disposal sites. Yeah. And so it's something kind of very real that we have to deal with. And so it's always nice to put that in the story. I went to school in Appalachia for graduate school, and oddly enough, I was affected by the coal in the region. And then one of the treatments that I wrote, it was about an Appalachian town that was caught up in a coal slurry spill, where a lot of these coal ponds, because the EPA doesn't necessarily check them, eventually their kind of dams break, and then they flood whole rivers that go into whole towns. Yeah. And then from that, you'll also have this backdrop of the miners and the Oxycontin epidemic, because that's kind of the prescription drug of choice. How'd you find Bart? And like, what was the situation where you were just looking for stuff and then that kind of radiated?
Yeah. So I have for a long time followed the work of a small press based in Kansas. It's based in Kansas and Michigan now, too, called Pioneers Press. Adam Gennady, who I mentioned earlier, is one of the editors there. They put out really great work surrounding punk and politics, put out some great literature. And so I had read Bart's work about a year ago. Bart was reading, because he lives in Denver. I'd never met him before, but he was giving a reading with Adam Gennady and Morgan Eldridge, some other folks out in this weird, like, punk farmhouse out in Brighton. I didn't have a car then, but I talked somebody into driving. I talked my friend Liz into driving out there with me, and just started talking to Bart and told them about this project that I was starting. Told him, I got this new press that I'm able to run, and we're working on Noah's book, and Bart was a fan of Noah, and we just stayed in touch about it, and I hounded him for manuscripts. I was like, if you're working on something, you send it in. And so he did. He sent it to me, and I was so stoked on it.
Thank you, Bart.
Yeah, thank you, Bart.
Good job. Yeah. Wonderful work.
Yeah.
It's really the intention of the artwork in a lot of ways, because there's a lot of freedom in the deal that you guys are giving. Mm-hmm. And so the flexibility of that, I think that's really interesting for people in the entertainment industry or the book world, more of an open source forum of creativity, in the sense that the creators, we're here to make stuff. We want to create stuff, and we want to create more than we can possibly create in a lifetime. Yeah. And what I've realized starting as a filmmaker is, I wanted to start as a filmmaker and make the individual piece of work. And then I realized that there was more power in almost having a studio and a slate. meaning just a creative studio that produces bodies and bodies of work.
Yeah.
And at first, my idea was even limited to just film, video properties, and like music properties. Because with all the films, I always try to do different soundtracks or music elements that we can release as songs. So it's just another way to monetize, as well as spread the culture of the movie, which for the most part, some people don't watch movies. So if the movie has a soundtrack, then you allow people to discover kind of that experience through the music. And so now, kind of even in meeting you in our conversations at Trident, I expanded my thought to even thinking about even more, just a full content studio. Can you talk about how the Trident Press is like a drop in the bucket? This thing's happening all over the United States.
Yeah.
And then, just the names so that anybody listening, if they want to find different stories that come from different places that are equally as valid, if not more.
Yeah, definitely.
Because of the truth and the directness of them.
Yeah. I mean, well, I first of all, I like what you're saying about like about this mix of art forms and the interdependence of art forms. I think is really important because sure, a lot of people read books but don't listen to records or go to punk shows but never have bought a book. So this last summer I went on tour for my book, Cactus. And I went on tour with this band from Kansas City, Missouri called Tall Boys. So every night, we did like a 2.5 or 3 week tour. So every night I would give a reading from my book or from my zines, and they would play a set, and we'd play with either other writers or poets or bands wherever we were. And so we traveled all over the country, meeting these cool people who are doing cool things everywhere, many of whom maybe I had known about through Instagram before or something, but we start connecting and start building those connections. And really, anywhere you go in the country, there is great independent literature happening. Some of the presses to which I owe really a lot are presses like Maudlin House out of Chicago, House of Vlad in Florida, Glowworm Press in Philadelphia, Too Fast 2 House in Tucson. Pioneers Press is like the biggest. They're my biggest inspiration in how to do work and how to get work out there and how to work with people and make art that exists in the world to make the world a better place.
For people who don't know about Pioneer Press, even myself, tell me about them.
Jesse Duke and Adam Gennady started Pioneers Press. I don't know what year. I should do some research more, I guess. But they left California, where they were working for another so-called punk press, but became disillusioned with the way that organization was structured. They also had some of these, back to the land ideals, moving somewhere and like having a farm and like living off the grid a little bit and getting back to the land. And so they ended up at this farm in Kansas, which they run as an animal rescue farm. So they live there with all these animals, and they start putting out zines and put up a website and start creating imprints with other books and just like creating just this wave of culture that just washed from the middle of the country out to both coasts, and just like from the way I see it, just swept everybody else up in it too and created a huge influence for other people to start working on projects, something similar but with their own ideas backing it up. And so
how long did that take, do you think,
I don't know,
to build up this creative wave and then unleash it?
I don't know. I think
Was it started in the 90s, or was it started in like later 2000s? Or
I think I first heard about Pioneers Press when I was living in Salt Lake in like 2011, 2012. That could be a little ski-wampus, but so I don't know. That's like as far back as my history extends with them. I just I was feeling depressed, and I bought a copy of Adam Gennady's zine, The Do-It-Yourself Guide to Fighting the Big Motherfucking Sad, which is now a book that is in its 8th pressing, and that sort of pulled me in, that sort of hooked me into all of this stuff they were putting out, got me turned on to writers like Rachel Bell. And
was there anything like anybody kind of in the mainstream bookstores or even the larger independent bookstores that have noticed what's going on and then maybe started to like pull it together and or at least connect the dots to go, hey guys, we really need to recognize this movement in writing, which could also point to another kind of movement in art because they're working together. It's not just the writers, it's the writers, the musicians, the filmmakers. They're all talking and then they're all making stuff and putting it out.
Yeah.
They're not just talking, but they're literally making it and, releasing it at scale.
Immediately I think of another huge inspiration to me as a bookseller and as a publisher is Kevin Samsel, who's the independent press and small press buyer for Powell's in Portland.
Nice.
Right? And Bart Schaneman and I have talked about this a lot too, like walking into Powell's and going to that section of the bookstore and seeing just shelves and shelves and shelves of books by these people who you're friends with or who you know from online, whose books you can never find in any bookstore anywhere, and then all of a sudden, there they all are together, right? In one section of the bookstore, and it's very inspiring. So as I've started managing the bookstore at Trident, I've tried to take a lot of cues from Kevin and his work. I don't know him personally. Kevin, reach out, let's be friends. But just to create something, especially in Boulder, which is a town where, there are a lot of independent bookstores in Boulder. We're very lucky. Independent and used bookstores. So what's going to set Trident apart, and that's going to be creating it a literary space by cultivating the readings, also by providing access to this independent literature and these zines that people can't find in brick and mortar stores.
And then the other thing about Trident too, I think, speaking to just building the culture,
Yeah.
I think there is this arts movement kind of forming because there's so many different kinds of creativity happening. And then the events that happen, whether it's the book readings, I mean, that bookstore is packed with the book readings.
Yeah.
And that's really, really nice to see.
Yeah.
And then even, in the summer with some of the stand-up comedy offerings. And
the
then,
film series.
The film series is great. I mean, where can you see a free movie?
Yeah. Sit down, drink a beer, drink a cup of coffee.
Yeah, and I think I didn't think of it at first, but even for me, the film series was just a way to watch movies. But then I realized that with all the creative events happening there, it's increasing the resonance of the space, and people are coming in wanting to be part of something. As you traveled this summer on your tour, what other bookstores or kind of cool things did you see?
I think about a few examples that all have very different models. You have to bring something that people can't find elsewhere, and often that's in a sense of place or a sense of community or a certain flavor, right? Something that people can't buy from Jeff Bezos, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, right.
Which I think you can buy all of the Trident Press books on Amazon.
Yeah, you can.
So
if you want
Jeff's down with Trident Press.
Yeah, he's down. But you can also acquire things that he didn't shit out, and that's a sense of community and place, right? And belonging. And so as I was traveling this summer, there are a few places that really got me, and I thought we're doing a really good job. And they're all places that you wouldn't think of otherwise.
What examples do you think, just traveling through?
Okay, so if you go to Kansas City, Missouri, go to Revolution Records. They're primarily a record store, but they sell sick horror VHS tapes too, and great records, and they've just upped their book collection. Promise, the manager there, has started a literary collective that's doing really great work, putting out really great chapbooks and zines. They host shows. They're a community spot. They're a really great place. You walk in there and you're going to walk out with something that you didn't know you needed until you saw it. And you're also going to walk out feeling good that you feel like a part of this community.
I mean, I remember my bookstore in the Midwest in Carbondale, Illinois. That was really close to the university, but also rented Noam Chomsky DVDs and VHS. And then you could get all the books you couldn't get at Barnes & Noble's there. Yeah. So if you wanted, for example, like every kid in the 90s, the Anarchist Cookbook.
Hell yeah.
That was the bookstore that all the skater kids went to. You would just skate around, look at the bookstores and go, that one's got the good books.
Yeah, yeah.
And then if they had the Anarchist Cookbook, then you were willing to go through every single book on the shelf.
Yeah, totally.
To find the gem.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that, like, my friend having a copy of that when I was in high school got us so into graffiti and ultimately got me suspended from school. But it was a very, very important part of my life and building who I was. And I think these spaces can do this. Another space that I recognized and really enjoyed was in Lincoln, Nebraska. We were doing a show in Lincoln. So I was playing with tall boys. I was giving a reading. There's like some country western singer-songwriter who was playing. There's some like fun, jammy, groovy band called Oatmeal playing. We're playing in somebody's basement. And that day before the show, we went out to like drink Bloody Marys and wander around to bookstores. And we walked into this bookstore called The Novel Idea, which was just this tiny little spot with these, plywood shelves just crammed full of beat up used paperbacks. It felt like walking into a tomb, And there's the crypt keeper there behind the desk, ready to sell you the bones of literature, and it fucking felt great. And so that night, after the show, I was like slinging books, and I think I ran out of a couple titles, and I told people, well, you can pick these up at Novel Idea, and everybody at that show in this like punk house basement was like, fuck yeah, we love Novel Idea, yeah, what's up? We're gonna go there tomorrow, And so that to me reflected how a bookstore is a major part of an arts community, right? There's no getting around that. Lava Space in Philadelphia, they like have shows, have workshops, have shelves and shelves of books that you can just go in and read or borrow for free. Same thing at Albuquerque.
Nice, Albuquerque. Yeah.
Man.
Is it in the Old Town part of Albuquerque?
It's downtown, yeah, almost Old Town. It's like it's downtown. It's called Corpus Arts in Albuquerque is also another great space where you can go in, have free access to books and zines. It's a community space tied, through the community to a great coffee shop also in town where a lot of really interesting stuff happens. It's called Winning Coffee.
Nice.
Definitely, if you're in ABQ, check that place out. There are punk shows there at night. There are people hanging out during the day. People come in and sell books there.
I did not know we had so much love for Albuquerque.
Albuquerque's a great town.
One of the books that I was always fascinated with as just, trying to be creative and just understand the creative process, one was Mario Vargas Llosa's Letters to a Young Novelist. And in this 120 page book, every chapter is written as a letter to a young novelist. And every chapter is a theme that the writer will have to deal with. It's also what to look for. Mm-hmm. And, there were things like, yeah, dude, writing, there's a lot of rewriting. And so if you're not down for the rewrite, then you don't want to go on the journey.
Right.
And so understand it's a journey. And then other ones like, writers, as much as writers could be made and forged through hard work, really writers are born into it, meaning there's a context around them that gives them a unique point of view. And from that, they need to create. And so for me, I guess, I'm always curious where people are from. What was it like growing up in Utah?
Oh, yeah. So I went to high school in Provo, Utah, about 45 minutes south of Salt Lake City. And I really loved it while I was there. Provo is a very, very Mormon town. It's probably like 85% Mormon. I grew up Mormon. It's also a very beautiful town.
I grew up in Illinois, and I also had Mormon friends.
Yeah, there you go.
Just so you guys know.
Shouts out.
Yeah.
Shouts out to
it's
LDS
real.
Church. Yeah. But it's a very beautiful spot with mountains surrounding it and a lake on one side and a lot of really smart and interesting people there. I graduated high school and I started going to Brigham Young University, which is also in Provo, which is a university owned by the LDS Church. And I was not cut out for it.
I remember you telling me about the code of ethics.
Which, the honor code.
Yeah, the honor code, which was like no other honor code I've heard of.
Right.
Maybe it was like the military honor code.
Yeah,
I feel like all my friends who might have went into the military, there was like the basic training camp honor code. But
so the honor code, there rather than just being like, don't cheat, was like, there are certain dress and appearance standards, right? So you don't wear shorts that come above the knee. You don't have hair that goes down past the collar. You shave every day. Your sideburns don't come down past the bottom of your ears. You live in approved housing, and to maintain your approved housing status, that means no drinking, no smoking, no having, for me, it was never having girls in my room ever. No having girls over after midnight in the house at all. And, I was working at the university. I was going to school there. I was living in approved housing. I was working as a set builder, scenic builder for the theater program.
Oh, that's fun.
Yeah, it was really fun. I loved it.
That's fun.
But, I was not keeping this honor code. And it occurred to me that I was going to lose my schooling credits. I was going to get kicked out of school. I was going to lose my job, and I was going to lose my house, right? And I was like, this isn't worth it. I don't want to live this double life. I'm gonna be who I am, whatever the hell that looks like. But it doesn't look like this.
It doesn't look like no girls past midnight.
Yeah, that's not the way my life is.
Anymore. Yeah, exactly. I definitely fail the sideburns. I don't really shave, so I'm definitely not in that honor code.
Yeah, no. So I quit school for a little bit and went traveling, and then ended up moving up to Salt Lake City and finishing my degree at the University of Utah. I have a degree in Latin American Studies. Yeah. So I've spent a lot of time living in Central and South America. I used to write for a newspaper in Costa Rica, an English language weekly. I was down there writing for this paper and thinking, I grew up, my dad was a journalist, and he was a journalism professor, right? And so I grew up around all these journalists who talked about sort of like the nobility of the fourth pillar, right? And like the way that
the fifth estate, the fourth pillar.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, the way that journalism keeps government honest and all this stuff, and it was really, really seemed amazing and beautiful to me, this idea of journalism. And I'd always liked to write, and so I'd had some jobs doing, writing concert and album and book reviews for a magazine in Salt Lake City, Slug magazine.
Oh yeah.
And so I went down to Costa Rica to write, and man, it was great. It was amazing. I was living in San Jose. I learned a lot, met a lot of really great people, but had some experiences that pushed me away from journalism as a career. I remember once, okay, got time for a longish story?
Yeah, no, we got time. That's that's what the American Filmmaker Podcast is about.
Okay.
Discovering stories that need to be told, are being told, will be told, and have been told, and must be retold because they sucked the first time they were told.
There we go. So I was down there. I have a good friend, my good friend Katie, who I met down there, was a photographer for the newspaper. She lives in Denver now too. So we had an assignment out in Limon.
Limon Baton.
Yeah, Limon, out the biggest city out on the coast, on the Caribbean coast. So I spent a bunch of time on the Caribbean coast. I love it over there. But we were on assignment over there, and so we went out maybe Friday night. We got the bus Friday at noon. We left the office early, bussed out to Limon, got the story. We got all the interviews and the photos we needed by Saturday morning.
What was the story about?
Oh, I'm trying to remember now. It was about some sort of traditional yearly celebration or something, some sort of event, some sort of cultural event that was happening. I can't remember. I could look it up.
It could have been a saint involved.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely a saint involved.
Yeah, probably. I think we probably wrote a couple stories from that trip. We put together a couple stories from that trip, but we were out there and we had everything we needed by Saturday morning. We didn't have to be back for a staff meeting till Monday morning. And so I had some friends that lived a little further down the coast in Puerto Viejo. And so I thought I'd catch a bus and hang out with them. And Katie said, you know what, I think I'll hang out in Limon. I've never really hung out in Limon. I'm going to stay up here, right? So I get on the bus. I go down to Puerto Viejo. Just luckily, I happened to be eating at a restaurant that was right up against the main road. I was sitting at a table just in front of the main road in town, the highway, which is, a tiny little road. and this Jeep pulls up, and Katie jumps out crying. And she doesn't have any of her stuff. She's like in her swimsuit. She has nothing. And she had gotten robbed at the beach. And they took her camera and her computer and her audio recorder and her passport and her cash and her credit card, everything. They took everything. And it was bad. So we ended up going back to San Jose. And she, was pretty shaken up by this, obviously, as you would be. She was trying to figure out what she was going to do, and she's thinking about maybe moving back to the States.
I was also almost robbed in an alley in Mexico by a drunk human that chased me down. I luckily got away, but my fear state is kicking in.
Yeah.
And I'm definitely, Yeah.
So she was trying to figure out what was happening, right? Where to go, what to do. She was like, maybe I'll move back to Oregon. And I was saying, like, no, you just, don't move back. Just, I just need to chill out for a little bit, and like get everything back together. Feel like you got your feet on the ground again. And so she's like, okay, I'll stick it out a little bit longer. And she had a friend who lived up in the mountains outside of San Jose, and he was going to the States or something to do a whitewater rafting competition or something like that, right? So she was house sitting the house, and it was this beautiful house up in the mountain. And so I went up with her boyfriend, and so the three of us were just hanging out there in this house, and it was beautiful. We're just like taking some time to just chill after Katie had been robbed. We're just like drinking and smoking a bunch of weed and hanging out, and the whole time we're up there, it's just raining, crazy rain. Days and days worth of crazy rain. One morning we wake up to the sound of sirens coming up the hill, coming up the side of the mountain. And so we go outside to see what's going on, and we see like a first aid tent set up and like all these police and all these ambulances. We grab our press passes, grab our cameras, grab our audio recorders, walk up the hill. And we see that essentially like the whole side of the mountain had fallen off because of these rainstorms. It's just this huge mudslide. Half the mountain just dropped down on this neighborhood.
Oh.
And so they were evacuating everybody and treating everybody and trying to figure it out. And we were trying to get in to go do some interviews because we're like, we're right here. This is going to be a big story. Let's see what's happening. And the cops wouldn't let us in. And so we walked up through this like onion farm, walk up through these fields, up the side of the mountain, find another gate with another cop, talk to him for a while. I think he was like really into Jimi Hendrix or something. So I like talked to him about Jimi Hendrix for a while, and then that opened the door for a bribe. And so he took us down in there, right? And he walked us through this house that was just like halfway full to the ceiling with mud. We were down there, and I mean, this whole neighborhood was just gone. We were down there, they were digging out a car that had an entire family buried in it.
Oh
dead.
my gosh.
I talked to this man he was like a metal worker. He made pans and trays for bakeries, and he had lost everything, just barely survived with his life. And his eyes are just, the look in somebody's eyes when they're just like rubbed raw from crying, from grief, right? And I just remember looking at that while I'm interviewing him and feeling like, I think it was a good story, right? Because it was the best story that I wrote for the newspaper the whole time I was there, because it was real and it was about people. And it's like this storm was a result of climate change, right? That it had been pulled all the way over from the Pacific that far inland and killed all these people, right? But I also felt like a little bit of a parasite being in there and trying to get these quotes from people in this time of devastation. While really, like, I don't know if my article would have helped or changed anything. I don't think so, right? But it sold papers. And so I sort of was coming to terms with that for a while and thinking about that and how I felt about that. And, this mixture of feelings, this internal conflict of having written something that I'm proud of, but used means that I maybe wasn't so proud of to get it, right? And a couple weeks later, I had one of my colleagues was writing a story about the rising rate of crack cocaine use in San Jose.
Whoa!
So,
How did that? It was just that was happening.
Yeah, it was happening. More people were using crack, I guess.
Was it because there was stuff coming up from the border? Now people needed Costa Rica to smuggle stuff, or no? It was just
I don't know.
Were tourists bringing it? Basically,
I'm not sure. The focus of this story, and I'm sure there's a lot more research that has been done by now, or hopefully. But the focus of this story was just that it's more present than it has been. It was like sort of an introduction to what might be a series, right? And so he had most of the story written, but needed to go shoot photos.
Okay.
And didn't want to go up to this neighborhood by himself. I mean, drugs are easy to get in Costa Rica, right? Like $10 a gram for cocaine, right? Like easy. But this was like a new thing. And so he didn't want to go up to this neighborhood by himself. He had some contact up there who was going to let him shoot photos. And so I was like, yeah, sure, let's do it. And so we got a taxi and we went up to the neighborhood and we got out and it was just like this sort of like dystopian scene, right? Like with people passed out all over and just like what you think of when you think of like a bad drug neighborhood. So we get out and he starts shooting photos and immediately this cop walks up to us, right? He just walks up and he's like, "What the fuck are you gringos doing? What are you doing?" And we pull out our press passes, show our press passes.
And he's still like, "What the fuck are you doing?"
Totally. It's like, okay, cool. I'm not going to drag your asses out of here, but I'm watching you. And if I see you taking any more pictures, I'm going to fucking arrest you. Like, what the fuck are you thinking? Right? Like,
fourth pillar, fifth estate.
Yeah, totally. Press pass. No, I got a press pass, though. So we're like, okay.
Okay, no photos.
No photos.
Still taking photos.
Yeah, totally. But like more covertly, right? So we're walking around and we got to meet up with this guy, this contact of my colleagues, who was like, yeah, you know what? Like, you can take pictures of me smoking crack as long as you don't get my full face in it because I don't want my mom to see, right? But he had agreed. We were like, okay, right?
Reasonable. Totally reasonable.
Yeah,
I'm with that.
Yeah. And so we wait around for him for a while. He shows up, gets off the bus, comes over. And it's like, yo, what's up? He's like, yeah, I'm totally down. Let's smoke some fucking crack. The only problem is
he doesn't have crack.
He doesn't have any crack. Yeah.
How did I know that?
Yeah. Oh, dude. Oh, this crackhead is gonna just let us do this, and he just happens to be loaded up with crack. No, he didn't have any fucking crack. He's like, so yeah, you got any money? He turns to my colleague, and my colleague's like, oh, dude, I don't have anything. He turns to me, he's like, yo, Nate, you got any money? I was like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, this is ethics and journalism. We're gonna fucking buy crack for this dude after the cop has like told us that he's watching us. We're like a block away from there. It's like, yeah, we got to do it, man. We got to do it for the story. So I went and bought crack. Bought crack from these two sketchy-ass, scary-ass dudes sitting under some sleeping bags by the side of this building.
How much was crack in Costa Rica at that time?
I think I paid, it was like the equivalent of like $3 for 2 rocks. I don't know. I don't know much about the crack economy. But
me neither.
Yeah, but it seemed inexpensive.
I'm a crack novice.
Yeah. It seemed very inexpensive. So I bought some crack and I tried to hand it off to this dude who's, the guy, the contact. He's like, no, you carry it. It's like, fuck, man. So I'm walking with these 2 crack rocks in my hand with this cop who's watching us. And he's like, yeah, let's go under this bridge. We went under the bridge and he smoked crack and we took pictures of him smoking crack and then we left. And I was like, man, I don't know if journalism's for me. I don't think it's what I thought it was. But
yeah, because I feel like the stories just get bigger and worser.
Yeah.
You're like, because then you're like a New York Times or like you're a war correspondent for some paper.
Yeah.
You're like,
which is cool, man. I mean, I think that's important, but like, I was just like, I don't think that I had the constitution for it or whatever. But I love writing, and I learned a lot about writing while I was there, and so that was like the.
Was that the turning point then?
Yeah.
And then you started
Then I started really focusing on fiction.
Yeah, because once the red flags come up,
yeah.
And then you've had enough life experience, you're like, I could use my creativity or something.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, all those people who worked at that magazine or at that newspaper are all great journalists.
Yeah.
They've all gone on to like really incredible careers. Like one of the photographers now shoots for National Geographic Italy and lives in Australia. One is, or was the Reuters correspondent for Guatemala City. Another is the Bloomberg correspondent for Mexico City, right? They're all doing these really interesting, really great things. I just, realized in that time of chaos that maybe wasn't for me. So I turned to an even less lucrative career in book selling, publishing, and fiction writing. Yeah.
That is a wonderful, wonderful story.
Thanks.
I think we might have even thought of like 6 movies.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
So on this podcast, we literally have 6 movies that any executive can steal and have one of their screenwriters who hasn't actually produced a film that they've written that's just sitting in their stables.
Yeah.
You guys can listen and you guys can steal a wonderful story.
Or hire us.
Yeah, or hire us. Or there's also all these wonderful presses out there that now you can license their books from and just tell your readers to read about, because there's some really wonderful stories out there.
Yeah.
This might be a good place to end it, because that's a really good high note. But even the message, we talked about the message of creativity and this like perseverance and just keep doing it until you're like the last one standing.
Absolutely.
So in a way, this story about this newspaper that you worked for, everybody continued what they were doing.
Yeah, right.
And as they continued what they were doing, then they achieved their artistic dreams.
Totally. Right. Like in this case, I was the one who was the first one to drop, right? And they're the last one standing and are up there doing it. But I've seen this also like in the world of creative writing and fiction and poetry. When I was going to school, I was taking these writing workshops and working with all these people who are so good and so talented and like just some of the best thinkers I've ever met, and we were all getting our first stories published in literary magazines at the time and really egging each other on. And a lot of those people have sort of dropped off. That was it. They wanted to get a story published. They did it. Now they don't work in that medium at all anymore, right?
They wanted the accolade, not necessarily the journey.
Right.
Yeah, or the constant creativity. Because if anything, I've realized that I'm not competing with everybody else. I'm actually only competing with myself.
Exactly.
And then really the competition for myself is just to evolve myself to where the creative output is just really consistent.
Right,
it's like going from one feature documentary to the advertising work and then publishing my next feature film or my next 3 feature films as like novels, which you have been a great motivation and kind of inspiration to kind of see this like movement happening, and then realize that if you really believe in your scripts and screenplays, there is work that is being written that's cinematic. So why don't you just put your money where your mouth is and publish the screenplay? And then it also extends your copyright and all the other stuff for the legal stuff, and it keeps your managers and agents happy.
Yeah, totally. I mean, just and the second you get that in print, you start clacking on the keyboard at the next one. Just don't stop. Just keep it going. Be the last one standing. Just do the work. That's all you got to do. Is you just got to fucking do the work.
What do people do? And if they want to find and read stuff for Trident Press, or if they want to come to Boulder and come visit this creative movement that's kind of producing all these books, movies, poems, documentaries.
Yeah. Right. So all the books are available for purchase on Amazon or at tridentcafe.com. You can also get them in the bookshop, at various bookshops around the country too. And come say what's up at Trident. I'm there sitting behind the bookstore counter a lot of the time. It's 940 Pearl Street, Boulder, Colorado. Come say hi. Write me a postcard.
Is there anything else you want to say? Because I feel like that was a pretty good episode of American Filmmaker.
American Filmmaker.
American Filmmaker. American book dealer. American writer.
American crack buyer. Abroad.
Yeah. All right. Thank you guys for listening.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on. Thanks, Josh.
Thank you, Nate. Appreciate it.
Yep.
This song I recorded when I was doing a documentary. I went to Peru and made my first short film. And this was one of the songs that we recorded to use as part of the soundtrack. We recorded it outside of Ollantaytambo in the Sacred Valley. Enjoy the song, and thank you for listening to this episode of American Filmmaker with Josh Hyde.